Hello, YouTube audience. I'm Crime Whisper, and I know many of you enjoy listening to these stories as you drift off to sleep. Before you close your eyes tonight, take a moment to leave a comment, letting me know where in the world you're tuning in from. And if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now, let's get comfortable, relax, and dive into tonight's case. In early April of 2021, in Houston, Texas, home to the second largest Vietnamese American community in the United States, a Vietnamese woman named Linh Chi posted something unusual on Facebook. Her message read like a quiet, desperate cry for help. If suddenly no one can find me, or if I'm found dead, please check my husband. At first glance, it might have seemed like an emotional outburst, or the kind of post that appears after a marital argument. But in hindsight, those words would become an eerie premonition of the tragedy that was about to unfold. Lin's aunt, Simon Law, who stayed in frequent contact with her niece, was the first to sense something was wrong. Their regular weekly phone calls suddenly stopped. Messages went unanswered. Simon replayed their last conversation. In her mind, Lin had seemed drained, nervous, and hesitant to speak openly about what was happening in her marriage. She knew something wasn't right, but Lin wasn't ready to reveal everything. As April turned to its final days, and there was still no word, Simon's worry grew into panic. She decided she couldn't wait any longer. On April 28, 2021, she picked up the phone and called the Harris County Police Department, her voice trembling as she reported her niece missing. Officers took her concerns seriously and immediately sent a patrol unit to check on Lin's home in northwest Houston. When police arrived, they knocked on the door, but the person who answered was not Lin and not her husband. Instead, they were greeted by a woman they'd never seen before. She introduced herself as the ex-wife of Curtis Holliday, Lin's husband. In her arms was a 4-year-old girl, the daughter of Curtis and Lin. When officers asked about Lin's whereabouts, the ex-wife looked uncertain. She explained that Curtis had asked her to watch their daughter for a while, claiming Lin had gone away to handle personal matters. But the story didn't add up. What kind of mother would suddenly leave her young child with her husband's ex-wife without a proper explanation? The officers' instincts kicked in. Something was deeply off. They reported the situation to their superiors, and soon a special investigations unit was assigned to the case. As detectives looked deeper, the red flags multiplied. If Lin had really left voluntarily, why had she left behind her car, her phone, and all her personal belongings? Why had she not contacted any family or friends? The answers were as troubling as the questions themselves. Neighbors were soon interviewed, and all expressed shock upon hearing of Lin's disappearance. They recalled seeing her for the last time in early April, appearing perfectly normal. None of them had heard any arguments or disturbances from the house. No shouting, no loud noises, nothing out of the ordinary. Meanwhile, Curtis's ex-wife's account only added more confusion. She told investigators that Curtis had called her a few weeks earlier, sounding anxious. He'd asked her to care for their daughter, saying Lin had left home and that he was too busy with work. But detectives found this explanation deeply suspicious. If his wife had truly vanished, why hadn't Curtis reported her missing himself? Why hadn't he contacted her family in Vietnam, anyone at all? And why, of all people, had he turned to his ex-wife for childcare? With these growing inconsistencies, investigators began digging into the couple's past. They soon learned more about Linh Chi's background. Born in 1990 in Vietnam, she came from a middle-class family and had a bright future ahead. Her life changed in 2015 when she met Curtis Allen Holliday through the WeChat app. From the beginning, the differences between them were striking. Curtis, born in 1961, was 29 years older than Lin, almost a full generation apart. He was tall, imposing, and carried himself with the calm confidence of a man who'd seen much of life. A native Texan, Curtis had once served in the U.S. military, and after leaving the service, he turned his attention to after his military service. Curtis turned to entrepreneurship. To Lynn, he seemed like the perfect image of success, a man who had built stability through hard work. He owned a family business specializing in discounted household goods, had a steady income, and even owned his own home in Houston, though. Lynn was fully aware of his past marriage and the nearly 30-year age gap between them. She didn't let that stop her. What started as a cross-border romance filled with sweet messages and long video calls soon led to a bold leap of faith, leaving everything familiar behind in Vietnam. Lynn moved to Houston to start a new life with a man almost 3 decades older than her. At first, things looked promising. She moved into Curtis's suburban home and began helping him run the business. Together, they seemed like a hard-working couple with a bright future. Lynn was quick to learn, her English improved rapidly, and she adjusted well to her new environment. In 2016, Lynn gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. At just 25 years old, living in a foreign country, she poured all her love into her child and focused on building a happy home. By 2019, she and Curtis officially married, hoping to create a more stable family life. Photos from that time, shared on Facebook, showed smiling faces and happy moments. Some of her friends even commented that she was lucky, that she had found a good life abroad. But appearances can be deceiving. When investigators began digging into Curtis Holliday's background, they discovered a very different man than the one Lynn had fallen in love with. People who knew Curtis closely described him as controlling, manipulative, and quick-tempered. He had a way of asserting dominance, especially in his relationship with Lynn. He didn't see her as an equal partner, but rather as something he owned. And for someone in Lynn's vulnerable position, that mindset was especially dangerous. As a new immigrant, Lynn depended on Curtis for everything, financially, legally, and socially. She had no independent income, no family nearby, and few close friends. That imbalance gave Curtis all the power, and Lynn very little. So when Lynn posted that chilling message on Facebook, "If suddenly no one can find me, or if I'm found dead, please check my husband," it was no longer seen as a joke. It was a warning. And now, with her disappearance, investigators were convinced something terrible had happened. A search of the couple's home began immediately. The place was spotless, too spotless. No bloodstains, no visible signs of struggle, nothing that looked out of place. But seasoned detectives knew better. The very perfection of the scene felt unnatural, as if someone had gone to great lengths to erase the truth. Forensic experts carefully collected any item that might hold a trace of evidence: fibers, hair, residues, packaging, everything for lab analysis. Meanwhile, investigators summoned Curtis, Alan Holliday, for questioning. It didn't take long for them to learn something shocking. At the time police first visited the home, Curtis wasn't even allowed to be there. He was under a court-issued restraining order, the result of previous domestic violence charges. Instead of easing suspicions, this only made them worse. If Curtis was legally barred from contacting Lynn, then how could he have possibly known she'd gone away? And why did he tell his ex-wife to take care of their daughter if he supposedly hadn't seen Lynn at all? The contradictions in his story were glaring. Digging deeper, police discovered this wasn't the first time Curtis had violated the restraining order. Just a few months after the first incident, he had tried to reach out to Lynn again, leading to a second arrest on May 5th, 2021. That meant Curtis was back in jail barely a month after Lynn disappeared in early April. That timing couldn't be a coincidence. It was during the same critical period that Lynn vanished without a trace. With this revelation, the case shifted from a missing person investigation to a possible homicide. Fortunately for investigators, Curtis's incarceration provided a rare advantage. With him behind bars, police could conduct a full-scale search of his properties, his home, his vehicles, and especially his business, without interference. Their first target his store and warehouse at 5800 West Sam Houston Parkway, North Houston. It was the place where Curtis and Lynn had worked together every day. On May 6, 2021, armed with a court-approved warrant, a team of officers and forensic specialists arrived on site. The air was thick with tension. Everyone knew this could be the breakthrough moment. Tension filled the air as detectives entered the warehouse at 5800 West Sam Houston Parkway. It looked ordinary enough, shelves lined with boxers, aisles stacked with discounted household goods, and the faint smell of cardboard and cleaning supplies. But the investigators weren't fooled by appearances. They knew this was the last place Lynn had worked before she vanished, and possibly the last place she had ever been alive. They moved slowly and methodically, documenting every corner, every stain, every discarded object. At first, nothing stood out. Everything looked normal, too normal. But then, near the back of the warehouse, an officer noticed something odd. A section of the concrete floor looked newer than the rest, slightly different in color and texture. The surface appeared to have been recently patched or resurfaced. When questioned, employees who had worked there claimed they hadn't seen Lynn for weeks and had no idea what had happened to her. One worker mentioned that Curtis had seemed unusually tense in early April, irritable, distant, and working late hours alone at the warehouse. That detail made investigators' instincts flare. A decision was made to bring in cadaver dogs to search the premises. The warehouse fell silent as handlers led the dogs through the aisles, letting them sniff the floor, walls, and piles of goods. When the dogs reached the back area, the section with the newly poured concrete, their behavior changed immediately. Both animals alerted to the same spot. Chills spread through the room. Detectives carefully marked the area and called for forensic excavation. As the layers of concrete were broken apart, a strong, foul odor began to rise, one that left no doubt about what they were about to find. Beneath the slab lay a large, black plastic bag, tightly sealed. Inside, investigators discovered human remains. The moment was quiet, heavy, and heartbreaking. Though the body was badly decomposed, it was soon confirmed through forensic examination and dental records. It was Lynn Chi. Her tragic prophecy, those haunting words she posted online, had come true. Lynn's life had ended exactly as she feared, at the hands of the man she had once trusted most. Further forensic testing revealed bruising and bone, fractures consistent with violent assault. Inside the warehouse, investigators also found traces of cleaning chemicals, and in Curtis's vehicle, residue from those same products. Curtis had tried to erase every trace of his crime, but science and persistence caught up with him. When confronted with the evidence, Curtis Allen Holliday initially denied everything. He claimed Lynn had run away, insisting he had nothing to do with her disappearance. But, as investigators presented more proof, phone records, security footage, and DNA evidence, his story began to crumble. Eventually, during an interrogation that lasted several hours, his composure broke. Curtis finally confessed to the killing. He admitted that an argument between them had turned violent. In a fit of rage, he struck Lynn multiple times, leading to her death. He then attempted to hide the body beneath the warehouse floor, believing no one would ever find it. Curtis Allen Holliday was charged with murder, tampering with evidence, and violating a protective order. In court, prosecutors portrayed him as a manipulative abuser who treated his wife as property, a man who silenced her permanently when she found the courage to speak out. The jury needed little time to deliberate. Curtis was convicted and sentenced to life in prison without parole. For Lynn's family, the verdict brought justice, but not peace. Her aunt, Simon Law, later told reporters, "Lynn tried to ask for help in her own way. I just wish someone had listened sooner." This case serves as a haunting reminder of how easily cries for help can be dismissed as drama or exaggeration, when in reality, they may be a person's final warning. If you or someone you know is experiencing abuse, please, don't stay silent. Help is always available. In the U.S., you can reach the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233 or visit thehotline.org for resources. The team of investigators entered the massive warehouse, a maze-like space packed with discounted household goods. At first glance, it looked like any typical storage facility. Shelves piled high with boxes, aisles crowded with merchandise, everything coated in a thin layer of dust from years of trade. But among the clutter, one detail stood out, something that made an experienced investigator stop in his tracks. In the center of the warehouse, surrounded by stacks of worn and aging products, stood a large, spotless freezer. Its surface gleamed under the overhead lights, untouched by dust or time. Unlike everything else in the building, this freezer was brand new, recently purchased, and completely out of place. Why would a business selling secondhand and discounted goods have a brand new freezer that wasn't even part of their inventory? The inconsistency was too striking to ignore. Moving cautiously, the investigators approached. The air grew heavy as one of them reached for the handle. He took a slow, steady breath, mentally preparing for whatever they might find inside. The lid creaked open, and in that instant, the warehouse fell silent. Inside, beneath a layer of frost, lay the body of a young woman, tightly wrapped in multiple layers of plastic. The freezing cold had preserved her remains, her skin pale, her features stiffened by ice, though partially distorted by the low temperature. Her identity was unmistakable. It was Lin Chi, the woman who had vanished weeks earlier. The same woman who had pleaded for help on Facebook before she disappeared. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the silence gave way to quiet, deliberate movement. The area was immediately sealed off, and forensic technicians began their grim work, photographing, cataloging, and carefully preparing the freezer to be transported as evidence. That same evening, the Harris County Institute of Forensic Sciences began examining the remains. There was no question anymore. This was a homicide. But determining how Lin died proved incredibly difficult. The extreme cold had destroyed much of the soft tissue evidence. There were no visible fatal wounds, and toxicology reports showed no signs of poisoning. Only faint bruising on her body hinted that she may have been suffocated, though an exact cause of death couldn't be confirmed. Forensic experts concluded that Lin's killing was intentional and premeditated. Meanwhile, detectives began tracing the paper trail. When they reviewed Curtis Holliday's financial records, one discovery immediately jumped out. Among dozens of routine transactions was a single, chilling receipt, a purchase for a large freezer, dated April 4th, 2021, just one day after Lin was last seen alive. It was the very same model, now sitting in the middle of his warehouse. Investigators quickly contacted the appliance store where the purchase had been made and obtained security footage from that day. In the grainy black and white video, there he was, Curtis Allen Holliday, standing beside the brand new freezer, alone. He loaded it onto his truck himself, with no assistance. His movements hurried and deliberate. It didn't look like a normal shopping trip. It looked like a man carrying out a plan. This evidence was a turning point. Proof that Curtis had taken deliberate steps to conceal what he had done, not to search for his missing wife. Next, investigators turned to the couple's digital footprints. They requested phone records and cell tower data from both Lin and Curtis, mapping their movements in early April. The data told a chilling story. On the evening of April 3rd, 2021, both phones had pinged from the same location, Curtis's warehouse. That was the last time Lin's phone ever transmitted a signal. After that moment, there were no more calls, no texts, no location data. Her phone had gone completely silent. This detail fit perfectly with the growing theory. Curtis had lured or coerced Lin to meet him at the warehouse that night. perhaps under the pretense of talking about their ongoing separation, and during that confrontation, something terrible happened the next day. He bought the freezer to hide the body. Another crucial piece of evidence came from the post Lynn had made on Facebook, the one her aunt, Simon Law, had shown investigators. The original post read in English, "My name is Lahi Linchi. If suddenly no one can find me, or if I'm found dead, check my husband. He has threatened to kill me many times, especially now that we're getting divorced." Lynn had even included her full name, date of birth, Houston address, her husband's name, and their daughter's name, as if she knew. This might one day be used to identify her. It was less a social media post and more a last will and testament, written by a woman who knew the danger she was in. Witness testimonies supported the timeline. One neighbor recalled seeing Lynn on April 3rd, consistent with the phone data. Curtis's ex-wife told police that around that same time, Curtis had suddenly contacted her, asking her to take care of their daughter because, according to him, Lynn had left home with another man. It was a blatant attempt to craft an alibi, to make it appear as though Lynn had left voluntarily. Investigators also explored whether anyone might have helped Curtis cover up the crime. Although his ex-wife's involvement seemed unusual, there was no direct evidence connecting her to the killing or disposal of the body. The same held true for employees or acquaintances. None appeared to have known what Curtis had done. Every piece of evidence now pointed to a single conclusion. Curtis Allen Holliday had murdered his wife, Lynn Sheen, tried to hide her inside a freezer in his warehouse at the time. He remained in custody, held without bail, for violating the restraining order that had been meant to keep him away from her, while Curtis sat in jail for violating the court's restraining order. Investigators pressed on with the murder case. At first, he refused to confess. He claimed complete innocence, said he was worried about his wife, that she had simply disappeared, and he had no idea why. But when detectives told him they had found Lynn Kai's body, Curtis's demeanor shifted instantly. He broke down, pretending to sob, and spun a new story, one that investigators quickly saw right through. Curtis claimed that Lynn had taken her own life, and that when he discovered her, he panicked. He said he didn't know what to do, so he hid her body in the freezer. But the evidence, physical, digital, and circumstantial, told a very different story. Investigators already knew this wasn't panic. It was premeditation. Using all the clues they'd gathered, police carefully reconstructed the final day of Lynn Kai's life. It was April 3rd, 20-1, that morning. Lynn woke up early, made breakfast for her young daughter, and silently decided that this would be the day she finally told her husband she wanted a divorce. Before taking action, she sat down and typed out a message on Facebook, her heartbreaking post that would later serve as her last cry for help. Around noon, Curtis called her. During their conversation, Lynn told him directly that she wanted a divorce, in a desperate attempt to make him let her go. She even pretended that there was someone else in her life. That lie would prove fatal. Curtis exploded in anger, screaming into the phone, threatening that if she ever left him, she wouldn't live to regret it. Frightened that the neighbors might overhear the argument, Lynn hung up. Later that day, Lynn called her aunt, Simon Law, her voice trembling. She said things were bad, that Curtis was out of control, and that she might have to leave the house soon. Simon urged her to contact the police immediately if he threatened her again, but Lynn hesitated. Curtis already had a court hearing coming up for his earlier assault, and she didn't want to complicate things further. She told Simon she would wait just a few more days, then quietly leave with her daughter. It was a decision that would cost her life. That afternoon, Curtis was still boiling with rage. He called Lynn again, telling her to come to the warehouse so they could talk things out once and for all. Despite her fear, Lynn agreed. She wanted to end things peacefully, to talk face to face and move on. Later that evening, she drove to the warehouse. The area was nearly deserted, the sky dim under the pale glow of the streetlights. The large metal roll-up door was half open. Inside, Curtis was waiting. When Lynn walked in, she immediately sensed danger. Curtis stood in the center of the storage room, surrounded by stacks of boxes. His eyes were cold. Without a word, he pulled the door shut behind her. He began accusing her, shouting, demanding to know whether she really wanted to leave him, whether there was another man. Lynn barely had time to explain before his anger erupted into violence. He lunged at her, striking her, and in his fury, grabbed her by the neck. She fought desperately, clawing at his hands, tears streaming down her face, but his grip only tightened. Moments later, Lynn collapsed to the concrete floor, motionless. For a while, Curtis just stood there, breathing heavily, staring down at his wife's body. The rage that had driven him seconds ago began to fade, replaced by fear. Fear of what he had done. Fear of what would come next. He began pacing back and forth, mind racing. Then, coldly, he decided what to do. He dragged Lynn's body to a corner of the warehouse, afraid someone might walk in. He shoved her into a large cardboard box, locked the warehouse, and drove away. That same night, Curtis went to a 24-hour appliance store. He purchased a brand new chest freezer, the kind used for storing frozen goods, and returned to the warehouse just before dawn. There, he wrapped Lynn's body in several layers of plastic and duct tape to contain the odor. Without a trace of remorse, he lifted her into the freezer, slammed the lid shut, and locked it. He left it sitting in the middle of the warehouse, covering it with a few boxes to make it seem like part of the inventory. Over the following days, Curtis began his cover-up. He called his ex-wife, claiming Lynn had run off and asked her to take care of their daughter. He told friends that Lynn had suddenly gone back to Vietnam due to a family emergency. To his customers, he said she was away on a buying trip for the store. Curtis went about his days pretending everything was normal, opening the shop, making sales, even chatting casually with regulars. What he didn't anticipate was that Lynn's family, especially Aunt Simon, would not stay silent. By the end of April, when Simon reported her niece missing, Curtis's carefully built illusion began to unravel. On May 5th, when police arrived at his home with a warrant for violating the restraining order, Curtis tried to bluff one last time, claiming Lynn had left voluntarily. But within 24 hours, his lies collapsed. The freezer, the receipts, the phone data, everything pointed straight back to him. Curtis Allen Holliday had murdered his wife, hidden her body, and tried to erase every trace of her existence. And now, he would have to face the consequences. Curtis Allen Holliday's downfall began quietly, with a simple court order. After violating the restraining order, he was immediately handcuffed and taken into custody, even as the cold metal clicked around his wrists. Curtis still believed he could outsmart the system. In his mind, police had nothing. No body, no proof, no crime. He convinced himself there was still a way out. He even rehearsed a story that Lynn Chi had taken her own life at the warehouse, and that, in a moment of panic, afraid of being blamed because of the restraining order, he hid her in the freezer. But that fragile lie crumbled fast. Once investigators revealed the mountain of evidence, the receipt, the CCTV footage, the phone data, the Facebook message, there was nowhere left to run, and so, justice finally began to take shape. In July 2021, prosecutors officially charged Curtis Allen Holliday with first-degree murder. A Harris County grand jury heard the evidence, and the vote was unanimous. The indictment was approved. On July 14, 2021, Curtis was transferred to a high-security detention facility under a no-bail order, given the gravity of the crime. The case now entered the criminal court system, the long, methodical march toward justice for Lynn Chi, but the road ahead was not easy. Curtis hired one of Houston's most experienced criminal defense attorneys, Dick DeGuerin, a name well known for handling difficult cases. Their defense strategy was simple: plant doubt. They argued that the exact cause of death couldn't be determined, that there were no clear injuries, no toxicology proof, no direct evidence showing Curtis had actually killed his wife. Their goal wasn't full acquittal, but to create just enough uncertainty to weaken a first-degree conviction and maybe secure a lighter sentence. Meanwhile, prosecutor Lindsay Bondant and her team spent years building a solid case. They gathered everything: the threats, the domestic abuse history, the victim's warning post, the freezer purchase, witness statements, and the absurdity of the so-called suicide story. By summer 2024, nearly 4 years after the murder, the trial was finally ready to begin. The prosecution was confident. The defense was desperate. And just before the trial date, June 10th, 2024, both sides reached a plea agreement. Curtis agreed to plead guilty to avoid the risk of life imprisonment. In exchange, prosecutors offered a 15-year sentence. All additional charges were dropped, and the state agreed not to pursue a harsher penalty. On July 19, 2024, the Harris County Court convened for sentencing. Curtis entered the courtroom in an orange prison uniform. His face was blank, emotionless. There would be no dramatic trial, no cross-examination, no jury verdict, only the formal confirmation of his plea. When the judge pronounced the sentence, 15 years in state prison, the courtroom fell into a heavy silence. For many, the punishment felt too light for the horror of what he had done. Some of Lin Kai's friends and relatives broke down in tears, their anger spilling over as the guards led Curtis away. Only one family member stood quietly in the back: Aunt Simon, the woman who had fought tirelessly to bring the truth to light. She refused interviews, walking out of the courthouse without a word. Her eyes said everything: grief, exhaustion, and a faint glimmer of peace that at least, finally, Lynn had been found and her story told. Story 2. Just a few months later, another case, this time in Australia, would send shockwaves through the public. Australia's emergency hotline, 0, received a frantic call in the middle of the night, reporting a violent home invasion and kidnapping at a house on Grinnacore Road, Bankstown. The trembling voice on the line belonged to a 15-year-old boy, crying in terror. He told the dispatcher that a group of armed men had just stormed their home, attacked his mother, and dragged her away. Neighbors confirmed they'd heard screams echoing through the quiet street moments earlier, when police arrived. The sight inside was devastating. The 15-year-old sat in shock, covered in blood that wasn't his own. Beside him lay his 8-year-old brother, unconscious, his small head swollen and bleeding from a brutal blow. The house was wrecked, furniture overturned, doors smashed. It was clear a violent struggle had taken place. Both children were rushed to the hospital. Doctors confirmed the younger boy had suffered a severe traumatic brain injury from being struck with a baseball bat. He was placed into emergency surgery and later fell into a coma. But their mother, a 45-year-old woman, was nowhere to be found. Just over an hour later, around 11:30 p.m., a resident in Beverly Hills, about 5 miles away, called police to report a car fire at the end of Welfare Avenue, a quiet dead-end street near a park. Fire crews raced to the scene. The black SUV was engulfed in flames, lighting up the night sky. When firefighters finally extinguished the blaze and the smoke cleared, what they found left even the most seasoned officers shaken. Inside the back seat of the charred vehicle was a human body, burned beyond recognition. The scene was so gruesome that some firefighters later admitted they could still smell the smoke and death in their dreams as investigators sealed off the area. One chilling question loomed over them. Was this the missing mother from Banks? The charred body inside the burned SUV was very likely the woman kidnapped from Bankstown just an hour earlier. Standing before the twisted metal frame and the unrecognizable remains Detectives immediately understood this was not a random act of violence. It was a meticulously calculated murder, executed with chilling precision. That same night, police began processing the Bankstown home, and what they found there was pure devastation. The front door had been smashed open, shards of glass glittered across the floor, and the living room was splattered with dark stains, later confirmed to be blood from the 8-year-old boy's head injury. Every corner of the house bore signs of a violent struggle. Overturned furniture, scattered belongings, and broken walls told a story of chaos and terror. Investigators could only imagine the horror the two children endured, watching their mother being beaten, dragged away, and forced into a waiting car. From the trembling testimony of the 15-year-old son, a clearer picture of that night emerged. According to him, 4 or 5 masked men, dressed in black and armed with guns and baseball bats, stormed into the house without warning. One of them struck his little brother in the head to silence him. Another pointed a gun directly at his face, threatening to shoot if he moved. Then, the attackers turned on their mother. Before her terrified sons, the 45-year-old woman was beaten mercilessly. The violence was so brutal that one of the assailants ripped off her clothing, a final act of humiliation, before dragging her, barely conscious, out of the house. They shoved her into the back seat of a dark SUV parked outside, slammed the door, and sped off into the night, leaving behind only blood, broken glass, and 2 traumatized boys. These horrifying details left even veteran officers shaken. It was clear this was no burglary gone wrong. This was a planned abduction and revenge killing, executed with military-like speed and cruelty. Meanwhile, 5 miles away in Beverly Hills, the crime scene around the burned SUV posed a new challenge. The vehicle was reduced to a skeletal frame. The once black paint had melted into dull gray streaks, and the interior was completely destroyed by the inferno. Inside, the victim's body was burned beyond recognition, the fire so intense it erased nearly every physical trace. Forensic teams worked slowly, in near silence, collecting fragments of evidence from the ash. Among the debris, they found charred remnants of clothing fabric, likely belonging to the victim. Initial analysis revealed another chilling discovery. The victim might have been shot before the vehicle was set ablaze. The location itself was telling: a dead-end street on the edge of a quiet park, isolated from traffic and houses. A local resident, still shaken, told police the area was usually peaceful. Nothing ever happens here. Everything about this scene suggested careful planning. The killers had chosen a secluded place, burned the vehicle to destroy evidence, and vanished before anyone could respond. By dawn, detectives had formed their first working theory. This was not a random crime, but a targeted act of revenge, carried out with calculated cruelty, meant not only to kill, but to degrade and destroy the victim's dignity. Realizing the scale of what they were facing, NSW police immediately formed a special task force, Strike Force, Bushfield, combining the major crime squad with senior investigators from the Bankstown and Beverly Hills divisions. Their mission was clear: uncover the truth, identify the killers, and expose whoever had orchestrated this horrific attack. Still, before they could move further, one critical question remained: who exactly was the burned victim in the SUV? All signs pointed to the missing woman from Bankstown, Mrs. Tranty Kim, 45 years old, the mother of the 2 boys. But the team needed scientific proof. Forensic officers collected DNA, samples from her children, and fingerprints from personal belongings in the home. The burned body, however, posed a severe challenge. The flames had destroyed almost all soft tissue, making DNA extraction extraordinarily difficult. An autopsy was ordered immediately to determine both the cause of death and to confirm identity, while the lab continued working through the night. At the same time, detectives turned their attention to reconstructing the victim's life, hoping her background, her connections, and her enemies might hold the key to understanding why this crime had happened at all. Interviews with friends and neighbors painted a portrait of Mrs. Tranty Kim as a quiet, gentle Vietnamese woman, someone who lived a modest and private life. She never caused trouble, never quarreled with anyone, the kind of person people remembered for her kindness, not her conflicts. But one detail immediately caught investigators' attention. At the time of the abduction and murder, her husband, Mr. Tong Nguyen, 45, was not in Sydney. According to relatives, Mr. Nguyen had been on a short business trip to Queensland. When news of the tragedy reached him, he reportedly broke down. He caught the earliest flight back to Sydney, desperate to confirm whether the charred body was indeed his wife, and to comfort their two traumatized sons. As detectives dug deeper, they encountered their first major obstacle. Mrs. Kim had almost no relatives in Australia. She had immigrated more than 15 years earlier and had built her entire life around her husband and children. No extended family, no close relatives, just a small circle of acquaintances. This isolation made it incredibly difficult for police to trace her personal history or determine whether anyone might have wanted to harm her. Just as the investigation seemed to stall, a breakthrough arrived from a neighbor's security camera. The footage, though grainy, captured a group of masked individuals forcing a woman into a vehicle late that night. The images weren't clear enough to reveal faces, but they confirmed the 15-year-old boy's testimony. Even more crucially, the footage showed two vehicles at the scene, a white sedan and a black SUV. This was the first solid lead. Investigators immediately widened their search, collecting and reviewing hours of footage from traffic cameras and private CCTV systems along the route between Bankstown and Beverly Hills, roughly a 5-mile stretch. A massive database of video evidence was compiled. Slowly, a pattern began to emerge. Around midnight, two vehicles matching the description, the white sedan and black SUV, were recorded speeding down the highway. Piece by piece, the travel route of the kidnappers started to come into focus. Police then made a public appeal, urging anyone who had seen or heard anything unusual on the night of April 17th to come forward. The response was immediate. One resident recalled hearing a loud engine revving near the victim's house around 10:30 p.m. Another remembered seeing a column of smoke rising in Beverly Hills around 11:30 p.m., roughly the time the SUV was believed to have been set ablaze. None of the witnesses saw the perpetrators' faces, but their accounts, combined with the camera data, allowed detectives to reconstruct a detailed timeline. 10:30 p.m. A convoy of two vehicles, the white sedan and black SUV, arrive at the victim's house in Bankstown. The assailants break in, attack the family, and abduct Mrs. Kim. 11:30 p.m. Both vehicles are seen heading toward Beverly Hills. At the end of Welfare Avenue, a quiet dead-end street, the woman is murdered, and her body placed inside the SUV. The SUV is set on fire, while the white sedan speeds away alone. Moments later, further traffic footage showed the white sedan continuing southbound, before vanishing from the system, likely having switched fake license plates to evade tracking. Investigators theorized the group may have driven straight to Melbourne that night, marking a clear escape route, while police worked to trace the vehicles. Mr. Nguyen returned to Sydney. When he arrived at the police station, he appeared exhausted, pale, and deeply shaken. In the identification room, tears streamed down his face as he confirmed the charred remains were indeed his wife, identified through a scorched gold necklace found beside the body, one she had worn every day. But during his interview, the investigation took a dramatic turn when detectives pressed him with the crucial question, "Do you know anyone who might have wanted to hurt your family?" Mr. Nguyen hesitated. His hands trembled. After a long pause, he made a shocking confession. He admitted that he had been involved with a Vietnamese drug syndicate operating between Sydney and Melbourne. According to his statement, He had been working within a large-scale methamphetamine network, moving product and money between the two cities. But recently, things had gone wrong. A shipment worth millions of dollars had vanished without a trace. The syndicate leaders, ruthless men with no tolerance for betrayal, believed Mr. Nguyen had stolen it, or at least knew what had happened to it, and now, police began to see the horrifying possibility that Mrs. Tranty Kim had been targeted not because of who she was, but because of who her husband was. The revelation hit the Strike Force Bushfield team like a thunderclap. If Mr. Nguyen's confession was true, then the case was no longer a simple home invasion or random act of violence. It was a targeted execution, orchestrated by a Vietnamese organized crime syndicate operating across state lines. Investigators immediately shifted focus. A new angle emerged. Mrs. Kim's murder was a message, a brutal warning from the criminal network, punishing Nguyen for his supposed betrayal. Within days, detectives from New South Wales coordinated with the Australian Federal Police, AFP, and Victoria Police to expand the investigation into Melbourne, where Nguyen's business associates allegedly operated. Financial records, phone data, and interstate travel logs were scrutinized. The first lead came from Nguyen's call history. Just days before the murder, he had received multiple encrypted calls from unknown numbers traced to Burnside, a suburb in Melbourne known for housing several members of the Vietnamese-Australian underworld. One number in particular belonged to a man named Phan Tony Vu, 38, a figure already on the AFP's radar for his suspected role in methamphetamine trafficking. Vu was no ordinary dealer. He was rumored to be a mid-level enforcer, responsible for discipline within the network, the kind of man people feared even in his absence. Further surveillance revealed that Vu had traveled to Sydney on April 16th, just one day before the attack, and returned to Melbourne early on April 18th, exactly, matching the timeline of the murder. This discovery gave investigators their first tangible connection between the Sydney crime scene and the Melbourne drug ring. But police needed more than phone records. They needed proof, tying Vu and his associates to the vehicle seen on CCTV. A forensic examination of the burned SUV revealed several crucial details. Despite the fire's intensity, forensic specialists recovered a partially melted piece of plastic, later confirmed to be part of a license plate frame. The serial code etched on its underside matched a batch purchased in Melbourne through a small auto repair shop owned by a man named Tran Hong, another associate of Tony Vu. That shop, investigators would later discover, was a front used to prepare vehicles for criminal operations, including changing plates, installing fake VIN numbers, and modifying interiors to conceal drugs. The walls were starting to close in. Meanwhile, a deeper dive into Nguyen's statement revealed another shocking layer. He admitted that, weeks before his wife's death, he had received threatening messages, texts written in Vietnamese warning him to return what was lost, or the family will pay. But Nguyen claimed he had ignored them, believing they were empty threats. He had planned to settle things quietly after his Queensland trip. He never imagined his wife would become the target. As the investigation widened, Strikeforce Bushfield analysts began piecing together a digital map of the syndicate's operations, a web connecting Sydney, Melbourne, and even international nodes in Vietnam and Cambodia. Dozens of names surfaced: smugglers, couriers, financiers, but the Sydney branch appeared to be under the control of a man known only as Uncle Ba, an elusive figure rumored to oversee operations from the shadows. For months, investigators tracked movements, analyzed calls, and infiltrated encrypted chat groups on platforms like Telegram and Signal. Finally, one message exchange broke the case wide open. A user identified as Phoenix 88, later traced to Tony Vu, had sent a chilling message 2 days after the murder. The woman burned, the debt cleared. Tell him not to play games again. That single line was enough. The task force moved swiftly. By August 2024, coordinated raids took place simultaneously in Sydney and Melbourne. At dawn, tactical units stormed multiple locations, homes, warehouses, and auto garages across both cities. 7 suspects were arrested, including Tony Vu and Tran Hong. In the raids, police seized firearms, a stash of methamphetamine worth nearly $3 million, and several fake IDs and license plates matching the description of the vehicles used in the murder. In a chilling discovery, investigators also found a set of photos on Vu's encrypted phone showing Mrs. Kim's house, taken days before the attack, confirming the operation had been premeditated. When confronted with the evidence, Tony Vu refused to cooperate. His only response to detectives was cold and unnerving. He should have paid when he had the chance. The statement sent shivers through the courtroom when later read aloud. The brutality of the murder, combined with the involvement of an organized criminal network, drew massive public attention. For weeks, Australian media referred to the case as the Bankstown Inferno, a symbol of how deeply organized crime had embedded itself within migrant communities. As the legal process unfolded, prosecutors charged Tony Vu, Tran Hong, and 4 others with murder, kidnapping, aggravated assault, and participation in a criminal organization. However, with key witnesses in fear for their safety, and the main victim's husband tied to the same criminal world, the path to justice was anything but straightforward. Therefore, investigators began to lean toward a new hypothesis. The attack may have been a retaliatory act of brutal revenge. The case was clearly no random crime, but one deeply rooted in the violent underworld of the drug trade, where betrayal and suspicion are often settled with blood. Tragically, the one forced to bear the ultimate consequence was an innocent woman. On April 22, 2025, the final forensic report officially confirmed the suspicion. DNA extracted from the victim's teeth perfectly matched the samples taken from her 2 sons. The confirmation ended days of uncertainty. The charred remains found in the burned SUV were indeed those of Mrs. Kim Tran, aged 5. This announcement closed the chapter on identification but opened a new and far more complex phase of the investigation. While forensic experts were still analyzing the SUV site, another team continued a meticulous search of the Bankstown home, scouring every inch for potential evidence. Investigators collected everything: fingerprints, footprints, fabric fibers, even microscopic residues, anything that could point to the killers. But the attackers had been highly professional. They wore gloves, covered their faces, and operated in near total darkness. It was almost as if they had rehearsed the crime in advance, leaving behind virtually no identifiable trace. Even so, one crucial clue surfaced amid the chaos. A small piece of black duct tape dropped near the doorway. Its placement and shape suggested it had been used to bind or gag the victim, and was likely torn off accidentally. As the kidnappers fled, the fragment was immediately sealed and sent to the forensic lab to test for possible traces of sweat, skin cells, or DNA. Meanwhile, at the Beverly Hills scene, forensic technicians painstakingly sifted through what was left of the SUV. The license plates had been completely removed, but the vehicle identification number VIN, stamped on the engine block, had miraculously survived the flames. Under special lighting, the numbers were revealed, and when checked against the National Registration Database, investigators discovered the car had been registered in Victoria under a non-existent company. It was a ghost entity, created to conceal the real owner's identity. Classic tactics of organized criminal groups. Ballistic analysis of several bullet casings recovered from the vehicle's cabin added another vital clue. Experts identified the weapon as a .22 caliber handgun, a small but deadly firearm, often favored by contract killers for its silence and concealability. At the same time, investigators began to analyze digital communication data, particularly focusing on the victim's husband, Mr. Tong Nguyen. During his interrogation, he revealed a chilling detail. In the hours leading up to his wife's murder, his phone had received a series of extortion messages, each one more menacing than the last. The texts were time-stamped like a countdown. 20 minutes left, 10 minutes, 5 minutes. Those short, cold messages read like a death clock, ominously foreshadowing the horror that would soon follow. At the time, however, Nguyen was in Queensland, and his phone was out of service range. By the time the messages were delivered, the tragedy had already taken place. Detectives theorized that the kidnappers, receiving no response to their ransom demands, believed Nguyen was intentionally ignoring them. In a fit of rage, they may have abandoned the negotiation plan and turned instead to vengeful execution, taking their revenge on the helpless hostage in the most brutal way imaginable. Piecing together the digital and physical evidence, the coordinated use of 2 vehicles, the structured ransom communications, and the methodical execution, police concluded they were facing an organized, highly experienced criminal network with members assigned to specific roles. As a result, the New South Wales Police immediately partnered with the Victoria Police, expanding the investigation to include the methamphetamine trafficking ring Nguyen had confessed to being involved with. Their suspicions were quickly validated. Victoria Police confirmed that they, too, had been monitoring a Vietnamese criminal syndicate suspected of operating a large-scale methamphetamine production facility. With this new intelligence, the two forces agreed to launch a joint operation targeting the syndicate's manufacturing hub. Just 2 days after the Bankstown tragedy, on April 19, 2025, Victoria Police raided a remote property on the outskirts of west of Ballarat, believed to be the gang's main meth lab. Inside, officers discovered a staggering scene: industrial chemical drums, filtration equipment, and large batches of precursor substances used to produce methamphetamine. It was undeniable evidence of a sophisticated drug manufacturing operation. However, the raid came too late. The site was empty. The suspects had vanished, clearly tipped off in advance. The farm stood silent, its machinery still warm, suggesting the fugitives had fled only hours before police arrived. When police arrived at the Springvale property, the suspects were gone, but the discovery was enough to confirm that the criminal network they were chasing was operating across state lines and was highly organized. At this stage, investigators shifted focus back to a critical question: who within the victim's husband's circle might have ordered or carried out the attack? Based on the husband's statement, police reviewed a list of names, individuals he had recently worked or communicated with in the drug trade. From that list, one name immediately stood out: Nguyen Tien, a 29-year-old Vietnamese-Australian man living in Bankstown. According to intelligence sources, Tien acted as a key intermediary between the Victorian methamphetamine syndicate and its distribution contacts in Sydney, an indispensable link in the supply chain. His name had already appeared in several intelligence reports on interstate drug operations, though he had no prior criminal convictions. The fact that he lived right in the same suburb where the kidnapping took place made him an immediate person of interest, and given his close connection to the victim's husband, investigators began to suspect that this might not have been a random act of violence, but a deliberate act of revenge, orchestrated by someone who knew both the victim and her family. Could it be, detectives wondered, that Nguyen Tien had exploited his acquaintance with the husband and his familiarity with the area to organize the abduction and murder as payback for the missing drug shipment? Police began a covert surveillance operation. Administrative checks revealed Tien rented a modest apartment in Bankstown, lived alone, and claimed to work freelance. Following the murder, he hadn't fled Sydney. Instead, he kept a low profile, staying mostly indoors, as if trying to appear uninvolved in the chaos unfolding around him. Meanwhile, investigators quietly obtained Tien's mobile phone data. Analysis of call logs and location records revealed a striking pattern. on the night of April 17th, the very night of the kidnapping. His phone had been active in the Bankstown area, and then suddenly powered off at around 10 p.m. Several hours later, it switched back on at a different location. The timing was too precise to be coincidence. It aligned perfectly with the window during which the abduction occurred, suggesting Tien had intentionally turned off his phone to avoid GPS tracking while carrying out the operation. Further investigation into his finances deepened the suspicion. Shortly after the night of April 17th, Tien's bank account showed a large, unexplained deposit, followed by an immediate cash withdrawal. Police suspected this was either payment for organizing the hit or funds used to cover the operation's expenses. With mounting evidence, digital, financial, and circumstantial, New South Wales Police decided it was time to act. At 5 a.m. on August 28, 2025, more than 4 months after the Bankstown murder, officers from the Major Crime Squad and Strike Force Bushfield launched a coordinated raid on Tien's apartment. The suspect was taken by surprise, arrested while still asleep, offering no resistance. His phone, laptop, and several documents were immediately seized as evidence at the Bankstown police station. Investigators subjected him to intensive interrogation, but Tien, displaying the calm composure of a seasoned criminal, invoked his right to silence and refused to answer any questions. Despite his silence, the evidence was strong enough to proceed. That same afternoon, August 28th, police formally charged Nguyen Tien with murder and intentional grievous bodily harm, the latter connected to the brutal assault on the victim's 8-year-old son. Authorities announced to the press that Tien was believed to be the mastermind behind the kidnapping and murder of Mrs. Kim Tran, though he may not have personally pulled the trigger. Yet even with this critical arrest, the investigation was far from over. Detectives were convinced Tien had not acted alone. Evidence pointed to at least 3 additional men, believed to be contracted enforcers, or hitmen, who had carried out the violent home invasion and subsequent killing. These individuals remained at large. Police vowed to pursue them to the end, coordinating with federal agencies and interstate law enforcement to expose the entire network behind the crime. What began as a single horrific murder case had now expanded into a full-scale investigation into an organized, mafia-like syndicate, a sprawling criminal enterprise that stretched across Australia's borders. But one question still loomed large. Who exactly was Nguyen Tien, and what could drive a young man to orchestrate such unimaginable cruelty against a mother and her children, simply to settle a dispute within the drug trade? According to investigative records, Tien, 29, was an Australian citizen of Vietnamese descent, born and raised in Sydney's Vietnamese community. He had long been known in the criminal underworld, regarded as a rising figure within a Victoria-based meth trafficking network. Despite his youth, he had already earned a reputation as an ambitious, calculating operator, trusted to coordinate drug shipments between Melbourne and Sydney, and to resolve disputes on behalf of his superiors. Though heavily involved in the underground trade, Tien had never been formally convicted of a serious crime, a fact that had allowed him to remain invisible to law enforcement radar for years. Little was known about his personal life. He presented himself as a quiet, single businessman, renting a simple apartment in Bankstown, ironically just a few blocks away from Mrs. Kim Tran's home. But beneath that ordinary facade was a man moving in dangerous circles, entangled in greed, revenge, and the deadly economy of the drug world. The relationship between Nguyen Tien and the victim was primarily through her husband, Mr. Tong Nguyen. Tien was known to be a close business associate and confidant of Tong, frequently engaging in dealings with him within the drug trade network. It was precisely because of this closeness that, when a shipment of the gang's drugs went missing, Tien immediately suspected his associate of betrayal or negligence, acting either on orders from higher-ups or from his own sense of vengeance. He decided to retaliate, not by confronting Tong directly, but by striking where it would hurt most, his family, according to investigators. Tian's motive was twofold: to punish and intimidate, both as revenge for the lost shipment and as a brutal warning to force Tong to return the missing drugs. It was a calculated act of terror designed to send a message through violence. Tian's actions revealed a cold, methodical cruelty. Rather than getting his own hands dirty, he operated from behind the scenes, recruiting others to execute the abduction and murder, while carefully constructing alibis and concealing his involvement. His detached, orchestrating role infuriated the public as much as the crime itself. To many, he embodied the chilling intelligence of a criminal who kills without touching the weapon. Psychologically, Tian fit the profile of an educated, strategic offender. He understood the code of the underworld as well as the boundaries of the law. By delegating the violence to hired men, he thought he could distance himself from the bloodshed, and by remaining in Sydney after the murder, he appeared confident that his plan was airtight. Some even believed he stayed intentionally, as if challenging authorities to catch him. But the law eventually caught up. After his arrest, Yuan Tian was brought before Bankstown Local Court on August 29, 2025. He did not apply for bail, a predictable move, given the gravity of the charges and the near impossibility of release. The presiding judge denied bail and ordered that Tian be remanded in custody pending trial. Outside the courthouse, Tian's defense attorney issued a brief statement to the press, asserting that the case was still in its early stages and that her client intended to plead not guilty. This meant Tian would deny all charges during the upcoming official trial, a move that, in the eyes of many, seemed more like an attempt to evade guilt than a genuine claim of innocence. For now, none of the three direct accomplices, the suspected hitmen, who carried out the actual kidnapping and killing, have been arrested. As a result, Tian stands as the sole defendant in the forthcoming proceedings. Legal analysts note that this could complicate the case, since Tian might attempt to shift blame onto unnamed accomplices to minimize his own role. However, given the volume of forensic, digital, and financial evidence amassed by investigators, experts believe such a defense will be difficult to sustain before a jury. According to court records, Yuan Tian faces charges of first-degree murder in the death of Mrs. Kim Tran, and intentional grievous bodily harm for the attack on her 8-year-old son. If convicted, he could be sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. As of now, the case remains in pretrial proceedings. Tian continues to be held in custody, reportedly maintaining a calm and defiant demeanor. His attorney describes him as ready to prove his innocence, though to the public, it appears as nothing more than another layer of denial. Story 3 as the Gregorian calendar marked the approach of the Lunar New Year. The usually modest Muang Fan Market, one of the oldest wholesale markets in Dien Bien Phu City, Vietnam, had transformed into a vibrant hub of pre-Tet bustle. Vendors called out prices, families hurried between stalls, and the air buzzed with the excitement of holiday preparation. Amid the rows of modern kiosks and the traditional stands of local ethnic traders was a small chicken stall run by Mrs. Tran Thi Hien and her family. Helping her that day was her 27-year-old daughter, Tran Thi Dian, a student at Tai Nguyen University of Agriculture and Forestry, who had returned home for the Tet holiday at around 5:30 p.m. on New Year's Eve, February 4th. As the market began to thin out, a strange man approached their stall. He expressed interest in buying a large quantity of chickens for Tet celebrations and requested home delivery. To arrange the delivery, he asked Dion for her phone number. Around 6 p.m. that evening, the man called her and placed an order for 13 chickens to be delivered to the C13 area of Nang Ward, about 2.5 miles from Moon Fan Market. Half an hour later, at approximately 6:30 p.m., Dion loaded the chickens onto her Honda Wave motorcycle, license plate 27H122 274.07 and set off toward the address. She was last seen wearing a white jacket and a blue helmet, but as the hours passed, Dion did not return. By 8:45 p.m., her family's worry turned to panic. Repeated phone calls went unanswered. By 10 p.m., with no sign of her daughter, Mrs. Heen went to the Dien Bien Phu City Police to report Dion missing. She explained that Dion had left more than 2 hours earlier to make a delivery and had since disappeared. Recognizing the potential danger, police immediately launched an emergency search operation. A joint task force from the Criminal Investigation Unit and local ward police, Mung Thon, Then Bin, and Tan Then, was dispatched to trace Dion's route from the family's market stall to the delivery location. The search quickly expanded. More than 300 people, including police, local security forces, and neighborhood volunteers, joined the effort. They scoured motels, warehouses, abandoned houses, and rental rooms across 3 wards, searching for any sign of the missing girl. Over 90 establishments were inspected that night, a race against time on the eve of the Lunar New Year. Despite the tireless search through the night of February 4th, there was still no trace of Dion. The only thing police confirmed was that she had indeed left the market as described, driving toward C13, Nong Ward, but never reached the supposed delivery location. At dawn, on February 5, 2025, the first day of Tet, the search effort intensified. Officers and volunteers were divided into smaller groups, combing through alleyways, riverbanks, and remote areas near rice fields and abandoned construction sites. By 9 a.m., a breakthrough came. A local farmer reported finding an abandoned motorcycle in a grassy area near the Nam Than industrial zone, about 2 miles from the city center. Police rushed to the scene, and there it was, Dion's Honda Wave, toppled over in the weeds, her delivery basket still attached, with traces of chicken feathers scattered nearby. Her phone, however, was missing. Around the area, investigators found faint drag marks on the dirt path, suggesting a struggle. A single blue helmet, matching the description given by her mother, was discovered a few meters away. The evidence pointed unmistakably toward foul play. Immediately, the area was sealed off, and forensic teams began collecting samples, footprints, tire impressions, and any fibers that could help trace the suspect. At the same time, police retrieved CCTV footage from surrounding streets and security cameras installed on nearby buildings and utility poles. Later that afternoon, analysis of surveillance footage revealed a chilling image. Around 6:45 p.m., roughly 15 minutes after Dion left the market, a camera on Pham Van Dong Street captured a white pickup truck slowly following a motorcycle that matched her vehicle's description. The footage, though grainy, clearly showed 2 men inside the truck, their faces obscured by masks. The truck later turned off toward a sparsely populated road leading to Nam Than, the same area where her motorcycle was later found. By the evening of February 5th, police officially classified the case as a kidnapping and possible murder investigation. The disappearance of a young student delivering chickens on New Year's Eve sent shockwaves through Dien Bien Phu, a peaceful city unaccustomed to such brutality. Over the following days, search teams expanded their range to include forests, irrigation canals, and farmland around Nam Than Ward. Hundreds of residents joined, driven by both fear and compassion. Flyers with Dion's photograph were distributed across the province, appealing for information. Then, on February 7th, tragedy struck. At around 9:30 a.m., a group of local searchers combing a cornfield near Pomlat Commune, about 12 kilometers from the city, made a grim discovery. Hidden beneath a mound of dry corn stalks was the body of a young woman, partially decomposed, wearing a white jacket identical to the one Dion had worn when she left home. Police were immediately called to the scene. The victim's body was found in a supine position, her hands bound tightly with wire, and her clothing disheveled. Nearby, investigators recovered traces of rope, a discarded beer can, and a torn piece of blue fabric, possibly from the perpetrator's clothing. Mrs. Heen was brought to the scene that afternoon, and, upon seeing the jacket and personal items, collapsed in grief, confirming the worst. The body was indeed her daughter, Tranquil Dion. The autopsy conducted later that evening revealed that Dion had died of strangulation, and evidence suggested she had been sexually assaulted before death. Time of death was estimated to be between 7 o'clock and 8 p.m. on February 4th, just an hour after she left the market. This horrifying revelation plunged the entire community into mourning and outrage. The Deerenbean police immediately elevated the case to a special priority investigation, deploying elite officers from the Ministry of Public Security's Criminal Division CO2 to join the hunt for the perpetrators. Within 48 hours, investigators began tracing the white pickup truck captured in CCTV footage. Through vehicle registration, analysis, and surveillance network cross-checking, they narrowed down potential suspects to a group of men from Deerenbean and Son, La provinces, many of whom had prior criminal records for theft, drug trafficking, and assault. Among them, one name stood out: B. Van Kong, a 44-year-old local truck driver known for his violent temper and connection to small-scale drug dealers. He lived just a few kilometers from where Dion's motorcycle was found. When police brought him in for questioning, his story was inconsistent. He first claimed he had been drinking at home on the night of February 4th, but witnesses contradicted this, stating they saw him driving his white truck toward Nam Than at around 7 p.m. on February 10th. Police searched Kong's home, and the results were damning. Under his bed, investigators found ropes, duct tape, and a pair of women's earrings later identified as belonging to Dion. Forensic tests also confirmed traces of her DNA on the truck's back seat. From that moment, the horrifying truth began to unravel, revealing not just one man, but an entire group of accomplices involved in one of the most brutal crimes Vietnam had ever seen. Following the discovery of key evidence at B. Van Kong's residence, the Deerenbean Provincial Police swiftly widened their investigation. The emerging evidence pointed to a coordinated crime involving multiple perpetrators rather than an isolated attack. On February 11, 2025, police detained B. Van Kong for further questioning. During the initial interrogation, he continued to deny involvement, insisting that the personal items and ropes found in his house had no relation to the victim. However, forensic results were irrefutable. The victim's blood and hair DNA were detected on the rope and the rear seat of his truck. Confronted with this, Kong's demeanor shifted. After nearly 10 hours of continuous questioning, he finally broke down and confessed to his role in the kidnapping. What he revealed sent shockwaves through the entire investigation team. According to Kong's statement, the crime had been meticulously planned by a group of 6 local men, all acquaintances, each with prior criminal backgrounds. Their initial intent, he claimed, was to kidnap the young woman for ransom during the chaos of Tet, believing her family had saved money for the holiday. However, the plan quickly spiraled into violence and tragedy. The group included B. Van Kong, 44, the truck owner and primary planner. Vu Van Hein, 38, Kong's neighbor, who helped lure the victim femme. Vanchien 47 menos a local farmer with a record for theft. Luong Van Wan, 33, involved in previous drug-related offenses. Vo Thi Hive, the only female suspect, accused of aiding concealment. B. Thino, 40, a friend of Kong's wife, suspected of helping destroy evidence based on Kong's confession on the afternoon of February 4th. The group had gathered at Kong's house, drinking and taking drugs. Under the influence, they concocted the idea to lure a girl delivering goods to their location. They spotted Dion at the market and deliberately placed an order through one of the men using a fake phone number. When Dion arrived with her delivery, they ambushed her, overpowered and tied her up inside Kong's truck, then drove her to his home in Nang Het Ward. There, they kept her restrained in a small storage room while discussing their next move. As the night went on, the situation turned horrific. Some of the men, intoxicated and paranoid about being caught, took turns assaulting the victim, ignoring Kong's initial ransom plan. When Dion attempted to scream, she was brutally silenced. Around 8 p.m., Kong used a piece of wire to strangle her to death. The group then wrapped her body in a tarp, placed it in the back of the truck, and under the cover of darkness, drove toward Palm Lot Commune, where they buried her body in a cornfield before returning to Kong's house to destroy evidence. The following morning, they burned the tarp, cleaned the truck, and divided among themselves a small amount of stolen cash, the equivalent of less than 2 million Viet, barely 80 United States dollars. The horrifying confession left investigators speechless. A young woman's life had been taken for almost nothing. Immediately after Kong's confession, police moved to arrest the remaining suspects. Over the next 48 hours, 5 more people were apprehended across Dien Bien and neighboring Son La province. During questioning, each attempted to shift blame or minimize their role, but physical evidence and overlapping confessions confirmed their shared guilt. On February 14, 2025, the Dien Bien Provincial Police held a press conference announcing that all 6 suspects had been detained and charged with murder, kidnapping, and sexual assault. The case was officially classified as one of the most serious criminal offenses in provincial history. The public response was overwhelming. Thousands of residents, still celebrating Tet, were overcome with anger and heartbreak. Vigils were held across Dien Bien Phu City, where people brought flowers, candles, and photographs of Dion to the market where she had last worked. Over the next several months, the case underwent extensive forensic review and psychological profiling. Evidence presented by investigators included DNA and bodily fluid samples linking multiple suspects to the crime, CCTV footage showing the white truck shadowing Dion's route, recovered personal belongings, earrings, phone parts, and helmet fragments, autopsy and forensic reports confirming the sequence of assault and death. By October 2025, the case was officially transferred to the People's Court of Dien Bien Province for trial preparation. Legal experts predicted that due to the brutality, premeditation, and number of participants, at least 4 of the defendants could face the death penalty. During the pre-trial hearings, B. Van Kong again confessed, expressing remorse but insisting that the killing was not planned from the start. However, prosecutors argued the group's actions, from luring, kidnapping, binding, to disposal, demonstrated clear, intentional homicide as the community awaited the full trial. Dion's story became a national symbol, a haunting reminder of how ordinary innocence can meet extraordinary cruelty. The government later introduced new policies to enhance rural security camera systems and stricter registration for anonymous phone numbers, partly inspired by the lessons from this tragic case. At her family's small home near Mung Fan Market, Mrs. Heen keeps her daughter's photograph framed on the altar, surrounded by candles and flowers. Each Tet since then, she lights incense and whispers the same words. "My child, you were only trying to help, but evil found you first." A lengthy criminal history involving theft and assault. He lived alone in a small, deteriorating house, located only a few hundred meters from the scene where Dion's motorcycle was found, recognizing the high probability that Hung was linked to the crime. The Dien Bien Provincial Police discreetly placed him under surveillance. They also collected testimonies from locals, many of whom confirmed that on the evening of February 4th, they saw Hung riding a motorcycle loaded with 2 chicken cages, and later that night, cleaning his vehicle near his backyard under suspicious circumstances. On the morning of February 11th, the task force summoned Vibung van HNG for questioning. At first he appeared calm and cooperative, claiming he had bought chickens from a girl at the market and denied any wrongdoing. But when officers confronted him with the security camera footage and witness statements, his story began to crumble. That afternoon, during an intensified interrogation session, HNG finally confessed. His chilling testimony marked the turning point of the investigation. According to his confession, he had met Dion at the Munghang Fan Market earlier on February 4th, pretending to be a customer who wanted to buy chickens for Tet. He deliberately arranged a delivery to an isolated area near C13 Market, planning to rob her of money and possibly her motorbike. When Dion arrived around 6:30 p.m., he lured her into a secluded area under the pretense of helping unload the chickens. There, he attacked her from behind, strangled her with a rope, and hid her body. He then stole her motorbike and phone, disposing of them later to cover his tracks. However, as investigators dug deeper, they realized HNG's story didn't add up. The condition of the victim's body, as well as the location and timing of the evidence, indicated that more than one person had been involved, and that the crime was not just a simple robbery gone wrong. Under continued questioning, and with new forensic evidence emerging, HNG changed his statement multiple times, each time revealing additional names. Eventually, he admitted that he hadn't acted alone. Instead, the crime was orchestrated and assisted by several acquaintances, including Bivon Kang, a 44-year-old truck driver living in the nearby Nong Het ward. Investigators quickly focused on Kang, whose house was located only about 100 meters from where the victim's body was found. On February 11th, police raided his property and discovered disturbing evidence: traces of blood, pieces of rope matching the ligature marks on the victim's neck, and remnants of burnt items believed to belong to Dyke. N.C. Ang was immediately detained for questioning. Initially, he denied involvement, claiming the blood was from butchering pigs, but forensic results confirmed the blood was a DNA match to the victim. Faced with undeniable evidence, Kang broke down and confessed. After several hours of interrogation, what he revealed was far more horrifying than investigators had anticipated. Kang confessed that the crime was not a spontaneous act by HNG, but a collective plan involving multiple local residents, most of whom had prior criminal records. He admitted that HNG had lured the victim, but once she was brought to his house, the group, under the influence of alcohol and drugs, restrained, assaulted, and ultimately murdered her to silence her. That night, they disposed of the body in a pigsty near his property and later moved the motorbike to another commune to mislead investigators. Police expanded their investigation. More suspects were identified and arrested within days. Pham Vinh Mva Van Hung, V Wang Van Hung Va Thao Hayan, and B Thao Eng each played a different role, from holding the victim, to guarding, to helping conceal the body and destroy evidence. By February 14th, all 6 individuals were in custody, facing charges of murder, kidnapping, and sexual assault. The case, now labeled 0219B by the Ministry of Public Security, became one of the most shocking crimes in Vietnam's recent history. It revealed a web of drug addiction, moral decay, and calculated cruelty that stunned the nation during what should have been a time of celebration. Each suspect's background, investigators uncovered that all of them shared a common link. They were frequent visitors at Kang's house, where they often gathered to consume drugs and discuss illegal activities. After several rounds of intense questioning, police began to detect inconsistencies in the suspects' statements. The interrogation team decided to apply a new strategy, isolating each suspect to prevent them from coordinating their stories. The first major breakthrough came when Luong Van Lap, the man who had suspiciously shown up at the victim's funeral, broke under pressure. Initially claiming ignorance, he eventually admitted that on the night of February 4th, he had been present at Kong's house, along with several others, including Pham Van Niem, Vbang Van Hung, B Van Kang Kong, and Luong Ven Hung, according to Alec. That night the group was using drugs and drinking heavily, when Kang revealed that a young woman named Dion was coming to deliver chickens nearby. Kang allegedly said he wanted to teach her a lesson and have some fun, prompting the others to laugh and go along. Later that evening, VNHNG, who had earlier arranged the fake order at the market, brought Dion to Kang's house. Once she entered, the men overpowered her, tied her hands, and took turns assaulting her while she cried and begged for mercy. La's statement sent shockwaves through the investigation team. The horrific details painted a far darker and more organized crime than anyone had imagined. Faced with this testimony, police reinterrogated BV Unsettling G Kong, despite initially pretending to be ill and incoherent. When confronted with the forensic evidence, the blood in his truck, and the matching DNA found at his home, Kang finally confessed. His statement corroborated LA's account. He admitted that after sexually assaulting the victim, the group decided to kill her to avoid being exposed. According to Kang's confession, they strangled Dion using a length of rope, placed her body in his truck, and drove it late at night to an abandoned house in Team 11, where they hid her body in a pigsty. Afterward, they disposed of her motorcycle and burned her personal items to destroy evidence. Following Kang's confession, the rest of the suspects, including Pham Van Ni, Luong Ven Hung, and Pham Van Dung, were reinterrogated. One by one, they admitted to participating in various stages of the crime, from restraining the victim to concealing her body. By February 18th, all 6 main suspects were officially charged with murder, kidnapping, and sexual assault, while additional accomplices were prosecuted for harboring criminals and destroying evidence. This case, now formally designated as Special Case 0219B, exposed a terrifying picture of drug addiction, moral collapse, and collective brutality within a small, rural community. The sheer cruelty and calculated nature of the crime shocked the entire nation, especially because it occurred on the eve of the Lunar New Year, a time traditionally associated with family reunion and joy. News of the crime spread rapidly through social media and national television. Citizens expressed outrage and heartbreak, demanding the harshest possible punishment for the perpetrators. Meanwhile, law enforcement officials described the case as one of the most complex and emotionally charged investigations in recent Vietnamese criminal history. That before killing her, they had forced the victim to eat and drink to keep her conscious while taking turns abusing her. This confession corresponded precisely with the forensic finding that the victim's stomach still contained a large amount of undigested food, indicating she had been alive for several hours after being kidnapped, and that the group had deliberately prolonged her suffering. As the suspects' statements grew more detailed, the investigators finally began to piece together a coherent chain of events. According to their collective confession, the crime unfolded as follows. On the evening of February 4, 2019, Lunar New Year's Eve, after receiving a call from an unknown customer, Kalmi Y Dion, the victim delivered 13 chickens to the agreed location in C13 Market, Tan Than Ward, Yan Bian Phach City. When she arrived, Vibang Van Hung, who had arranged the fake order, lured her to the home of Bivan Kang Kong under the pretense that the buyer was waiting there. As soon as Dion entered, she was ambushed, restrained, and her phone was confiscated. That night, the group including Kang Hung, Pham Van Ni, Luong Van Ll, Luong Van Hung, and Pham Van Dung, used drugs and took turns sexually assaulting the victim. When she tried to resist, they beat and gagged her. Over the next 2 days, the gang kept Dion imprisoned inside Kang's house, repeatedly assaulting her while she was tied to a bed frame. They gave her food and water, which explained the undigested food found during autopsy. Eventually, fearing that she might escape or report them to the police, they decided to kill her. On the night of February 6th, Pham Van Niem strangled the victim with a metal nunchaku chain, under Kang's direction. After confirming she was dead, the group wrapped her body in a blanket and loaded it onto Kang's truck. They then drove to an abandoned house in Team 11, Thania commune, where they hid the body in a pigsty, hoping the remote location would delay discovery. Later, to destroy evidence, they dumped the victim's motorbike and personal belongings in different locations around the city. When confronted with this timeline and the physical evidence, including DNA traces of the victim on the ninja, blood in Kang's truck, and personal items recovered from the suspects' houses, each suspect eventually confessed in full as the investigation neared completion. The most chilling realization emerged. This was not a spontaneous act, but a planned crime. The group had conspired days in advance, using the pretext of a chicken order to lure the victim. Their motives were a mix of drug-induced depravity, revenge against society, and the belief they could commit the crime without consequences. By March 2019, all 6 principal suspects, B. Von Kang, Pham Van Niem, V. Bung Van Hung, Li Wang Van Hung, Li Wang Van LL, and Pham Van Dung were officially charged with murder, rape, and kidnapping. Additionally, B. Thao Kim Thursday, Kang's wife, was prosecuted for concealing the crime and failing to report it. As evidence showed, she knew of the assault, but did not intervene or notify authorities. The Yên Bien Provincial Police submitted their final report to the procuracy, marking the end of one of Vietnam's most shocking and widely discussed criminal cases. Evidence from witnesses and surveillance footage. Investigators uncovered the most shocking twist in the entire case. The brutal kidnapping, assault, and murder of the young woman was not merely an impulsive act of violence by drug users, but part of a premeditated revenge and intimidation scheme connected to a drug trafficking network. According to Kong's B. Von Kang's new confession, Vi Van Toon, a notorious drug trafficker in the Yên Bien area, had secretly ordered the kidnapping of Dion. The motive was deeply personal. Toon suspected that Dion's mother, Mrs. Hyun, or Thyon, depending on transliteration, had betrayed him years earlier by providing information that led to the seizure of one of his drug shipments and the arrest of several of his associates. Toon allegedly told Kang and HNG that he wanted to teach her a lesson she would never forget. He offered the group money and drugs in exchange for carrying out the abduction. CNG, HNG, and the others, most of whom were addicted and desperate, agreed immediately. The plan, according to their confessions, was originally to kidnap Dion and hold her for ransom. But things spiraled out of control. Once the group had the victim, their drug use and lack of discipline turned the situation into a prolonged, nightmarish ordeal of sexual assault, torture, and murder. Investigators verified this account by tracking phone calls between Kang's group and Toon's contacts in the days leading up to and following the crime. Several neighbors of Toon also confirmed that they had seen strange visitors and vehicles, including Kang's distinctive 1.25-ton truck, around his home during the Lunar New Year period. When questioned, Vi Van Toon initially denied knowing the suspects, but after being confronted with phone and location data, as well as multiple testimonies, he finally confessed to ordering the crime. He admitted that he did not intend for Dion to be killed, only to be kidnapped to scare her mother. But he never intervened after realizing what his accomplices had done. With this revelation, the investigation concluded that the Yên Bien case was not a simple rape murder, but a complex, organized criminal conspiracy involving drug trafficking, revenge, and multiple accomplices. By April 2019, the authorities had arrested Vi Van Toon and several others connected to his network. This brought the total number of defendants to 9, including Vi Van Toon, drug trafficker, mastermind who ordered the kidnapping, Bui Von Kang Kong, organizer and key participant in the abduction and murder from Van Niem, directly involved in sexual assault and strangulation. Vinh Van Hung lured the victim and participated in the attack. Bing Van Hung, accomplice, and participant. In the Krimmelgang van LL accomplice van Dung, accomplice van Chang, accomplice Thou Kim Thursday, Kang's wife, charged with concealing the crime after over a year of investigation. The Yanbian Provincial Police submitted the final dossier to the Supreme People's Procuracy, recommending the death penalty for the main perpetrators, Toon, Kang, Neum, and Hung, due to the extreme brutality, premeditation, and organized nature of the crime. The case went on to become one of the most infamous in Vietnam's modern criminal history, sparking national outrage and widespread discussion about drug crime, violence against women, and the failures of community vigilance. And the others returned home. Shortly after, around 6 p.m. on February 6th, Kang Kong Hung and Chong Chang gathered at Kang's house to settle the situation as instructed by Tien. At this point, Dion was in extremely weak condition after 2 days of being restrained, beaten, and repeatedly assaulted. Witness accounts and later confessions confirmed she was barely conscious, unable to move or speak clearly. When Tone arrived, he assessed the situation and scolded the group for letting things get out of control. However, rather than calling for help or releasing the victim, he ordered them to finish it cleanly, meaning to get rid of her, to erase evidence and avoid exposure. Following Tone's directive, Seonji and HNG discussed how to execute his order. They decided to kill Dion that same night to prevent her from surviving and reporting the crime. Around 8 p.m., Kang Neum and HNG entered the room where Dion was being held. Neum restrained her legs, while HNG used a 2-section nunchaku, a metal chain weapon, to strangle her until she stopped breathing. After confirming that the victim had died, they wrapped her body in a blanket, placed it in the 1.25-ton truck, and transported it to an abandoned house about 5 kilometers away. The same house later identified as the place where her body was discovered. There, they hid her in a pigsty to delay discovery. Once the body was disposed of, the group divided the remaining property. CNG and HNG kept the phone and motorcycle papers. Others received drugs and money as compensation. Thursday, Kang's wife helped clean up the bedroom and wash away bloodstains, aware of everything but remaining silent. Afterward, Kang and Thursday returned to normal activities to avoid suspicion. Shockingly, Thursday later acted as the first witness, claiming she was the one who had discovered the body and reported it to the police, an attempt to divert attention away from her husband and the group. However, through DNA evidence, phone records, and consistent cross-examination, police established that all 9 suspects were involved and that Vi Van Toon was the true mastermind, having orchestrated the crime as a retaliatory kidnapping to collect an old drug debt from Mrs. Han, Dion's mother. The investigation revealed that what began as an attempt to intimidate a debtor turned into one of the most horrifying and cruel criminal cases in Vietnam's history, a blend of drug crime, debt collection, sexual violence, and murder carried out during the Lunar New Year of 2019. Appeal trial of the case officially opened on June 16, 2020, at the People's Court of Son La Province. This was one of the most highly publicized criminal appeal hearings in recent years, drawing intense public and media attention. Because of the brutality of the crime and the complexity of its motives, during the appeal process, the 6 defendants sentenced to death, Vi Van Toon, Kang Vong Van Hung, Luong Van Hung, and Neum, continued to deny key portions of their earlier confessions. They claimed their previous statements had been made under pressure and coercion, asserting that investigators had forced them to admit to acts they didn't commit. Toon, the alleged mastermind, continued to insist that he only wanted to collect an old debt and that the killing was not his idea. Meanwhile, Dung and Chung Chung, who had been sentenced to 15 years and 9 years in prison respectively for rape, asked for sentence reductions, claiming they had only been swept up in the situation and did not intend to cause death. Thursday, Kang's wife, who had been sentenced to 3 years in prison for failure to report a crime, did not appeal, but was present as a witness in the appellate proceedings. On the other hand, Mr. Cho Von Hung, the victim's father, filed an appeal from the opposite perspective. He requested that the court reinvestigate the motives and avoid immediate executions, arguing that there were still dark corners in the case, especially regarding the link between the drug ring and his wife's activities. He stated that while the family suffered an unimaginable loss, ending the lives of all 6 defendants will not bring my daughter back nor uncover the full truth. His appeal for clemency was viewed by many as an act of extraordinary compassion and moral strength. After nearly a week of careful examination of the evidence, testimonies, and forensic reports, the High People's Court concluded that the investigative and first instance proceedings had been carried out in accordance with the law. The court affirmed that the evidence DNA traces witness testimonies, confessions consistent with recovered physical items, and the chain of events proved the defendant's guilt beyond doubt. The appellate judges emphasized that this was a premeditated, organized, and particularly heinous crime motivated by greed, revenge, and moral corruption, causing immense pain to the victim's family and shocking society. On June 24, 2020, the appellate verdict was announced. The court upheld the death sentences for Vai Vinh Toon, Kang Vong Ven Hung, Liwang Ven Hung, LL, and Niam. The sentences of 15 years for Dung and 9 years for Chung were affirmed. The 3-year prison term for Thursday remained unchanged. The court also reaffirmed the order for all 9 defendants to compensate the victim's family with more than 2 million VND, approx. USD 8,300. After the appellate decision, all legal avenues were exhausted. The case was officially closed, bringing to an end one of the most shocking criminal cases in modern Vietnamese judicial history, a tragedy that began with a unpaid drug debt and culminated in the brutal abduction and murder of an innocent university student delivering chickens for the Lunar New Year. Kimberly's journey to pursue her dream. She guided her daughter in every step, from how to walk gracefully in heels, to maintaining composure before the judges, to preserving inner strength behind the flawless smile. For Nyla, seeing Kimberly crowned as Miss Manicure, Arling Ijo, was not only a proud moment, but also the continuation of her own youthful dream, now reborn in her daughter. However, behind the glitter and applause, Kimberly's personal life was not as perfect as it appeared. Around late 2019, she met Rafael Fernandez, a young man with a charming appearance and confident demeanor, who quickly captured her heart. At first, their romance seemed like a fairy tale. Rafael showered her with affection, constantly by her side at events and on social media. But over time, cracks began to show. Rafael's affection turned possessive. He became increasingly jealous, monitoring Kimberly's friendships, messages, and even her modeling commitments. Those close to Kimberly recalled that she had confided about Rafael's controlling nature, and that arguments had become more frequent. Despite her mother's concerns, Kimberly hesitated to end the relationship, hoping Rafael would change. Yet, his obsession only deepened. On May 9, 2020, Mother's Day weekend, Kimberly posted what would become her final photo on social media, a radiant picture with her mother, accompanied by the caption, "For you, Mom, my love, my light, my everything." That evening, she told her family she was going out to meet Rafael for dinner. She never returned. When Kimberly failed to come home or answer calls, her family immediately contacted the police. Friends began circulating her photos online, and soon the story made national headlines. A beauty queen missing after a date with her boyfriend. It was a mystery that shocked the public. 3 days later, on May 12th, the case took a grim turn. Authorities found a badly decomposed body near the border of Amazonas and Venezuela, in a dense, mosquito-infested area of forest. The identification confirmed everyone's worst fear. It was Kimberly Karen Mota. The autopsy revealed multiple stab wounds, indicating she had fought desperately for her life. Police quickly named Rafael Fernandez as the prime suspect. Witnesses saw him with Kimberly on the night she disappeared. Surveillance footage showed his car leaving the city toward the Venezuelan border. By the time authorities issued an arrest warrant, Rafael had vanished, crossing into Venezuela to evade capture. What followed was a nationwide manhunt, involving cooperation between Brazilian and Venezuelan authorities. Interpol was alerted, and Kimberly's mother Nyla made emotional public appeals for justice. For weeks, the case gripped Brazil, a tragic symbol of love turned into control, affection into violence. After more than 2 weeks on the run, Rafael was finally captured by Venezuelan police in Ciudad Bolivar and extradited back to Brazil. During interrogation, he confessed to killing Kimberly after a heated argument. He claimed she had threatened to end the relationship, and in a fit of rage, he attacked her. The Brazilian court later sentenced Rafael Fernandez to 31 years in prison for femicide and concealment of a corpse. The story of Kimberly Karen Mota, once the pride of Matt McCore, became a heartbreaking lesson about the dangers of obsessive love and the silent suffering many women face behind closed doors. Her mother Nyla has since dedicated her life to raising awareness about domestic violence, turning her grief into advocacy. Toxic and frightening, Kimberly confided to a close friend that she felt as if she was living with a stranger who wanted to own her, not love her. Despite her calm appearance in public, she was deeply anxious, torn between fear and the hope that Rafael might eventually let her go peacefully. In late April 2020, Kimberly finally gathered the courage to end the relationship. She told Rafael through a message that she wanted to focus on school and her modeling work, and that they should part ways on good terms. But for Rafael, that message was like a spark to a powder keg. He refused to accept it. He bombarded her with texts and calls, alternating between begging for forgiveness and threatening that if she wasn't his, she would belong to no one else. Kimberly began blocking his numbers and social accounts, but Rafael always found new ways to reach her, new accounts, new phone numbers. She told her Uncle Henry that she felt someone was following her, that she had seen Rafael's car parked near her university several times. Henry offered to report it to the police, but Kimberly, hoping to avoid trouble, said she'd handle it herself. On May 10, 2020, Mother's Day, Kimberly spent the morning with her mother Nyla via a video call, smiling and sending love. That same evening, she received a message from Rafael saying he just wanted to see her one last time to talk calmly. Kimberly hesitated but eventually agreed, thinking closure might help end things peacefully. She told her uncle she was going out for a short drive and would be back soon. That was the last time Henry saw his niece alive. When Kimberly didn't return home that night and her phone went unanswered, her family's worry turned into panic. The next morning, Henry filed a missing person report. Police began searching immediately, tracing phone records and surveillance footage. Cameras near Kimberly's university captured her getting into Rafael's car that evening and never coming back. 2 days later, Rafael's car was found abandoned near a dirt road leading toward the border of Amazonas and Venezuela. Inside were traces of blood, later confirmed to be Kimberly's. Following a tip from locals, authorities discovered a shallow grave deep in the forest, and there, they found her body. Kimberly had been stabbed multiple times. Her death was ruled a crime of passion, femicide, a brutal act of jealousy and control. Rafael had vanished, fleeing across the Venezuelan border. For 2 tense weeks, he was one of Brazil's most wanted fugitives. Interpol issued an alert, and Venezuelan authorities joined the manhunt. Finally, on May 20, 2020, he was arrested in Ciudad Bolivar after being recognized by locals from news coverage. During interrogation, Rafael admitted that he killed Kimberly after she told him she was ending the relationship for good. He claimed it was a moment of madness, that he couldn't accept losing her. In 2021, Rafael Fernandes Rodrigues was sentenced to 31 years in prison for femicide and concealment of a body. The tragedy of Kimberly Karen Moda, once a bright rising star in Brazil's pageant world, became a stark reminder of how quickly love can turn into possession, and how dangerous obsession can be when ignored. Her mother, Nyla Moda, has since dedicated her life to supporting women in abusive relationships, turning her daughter's story into a movement for awareness and change. After Kimberly's funeral, held in her hometown of Menacor, the grief that once silenced the small community turned into a collective cry for justice. Hundreds attended, family, classmates, fellow contestants, and strangers who had followed her story on national television. Her mother, Nyla Moda, stood beside the white coffin draped with a sash that read, Miss Menacor, 2019, through tears. Nyla said only one sentence that the entire nation would remember: "They took my daughter's life, but not her light." In the months following Kimberly's death, Nyla withdrew completely from public life. For weeks, she barely ate or spoke. Her house, once filled with laughter and the sounds of heels clicking against tile floors as Kimberly practiced her pageant walk, became hauntingly silent. But gradually, messages began to pour in from mothers, daughters, and young women across Brazil, sharing their own stories of jealousy, control, and fear. Many said Kimberly's story had given them the courage to leave abusive relationships. That realization changed something inside Nyla. She decided her daughter's life would not end as just another headline in the growing list of Brazil's femicide victims. By late 2020, Nyla founded the Instituto Luz de Kimberly's Light Foundation, an organization aimed at raising awareness about emotional abuse, digital harassment, and gender-based violence. The foundation offers free legal aid, therapy sessions, and educational programs in schools across Amazonas state. Its motto, "Love should never hurt." Nyla also began collaborating with women's rights groups, organizing public forums, and speaking on national talk shows. Her speeches were raw but powerful, not just the words of a grieving mother, but of a woman determined to fight the culture that normalizes possessive love as passion. In 2021, when Rafael Fernandes received his final 31-year sentence, Nyla was present in the courtroom. She didn't cry this time. Instead, she looked at him and said softly, "You didn't just kill my daughter. You killed the man you could have been." Her poise and strength drew national attention. The Kimberly Moda case became a cornerstone example in discussions about femicide laws in Brazil, especially concerning the role of psychological violence and digital stalking before escalation to physical harm. In 2022, the Brazilian Congress passed a new bill requiring schools to incorporate relationship safety education into high school curricula, unofficially dubbed Kimberly's Law. Every year on May 10th, Nyla organizes the Caminhada da Luz Walk of Light in Men. Participants, mothers, students, activists, and survivors walk through the streets holding candles and signs bearing names of women lost to domestic violence. Kimberly's favorite song, Photograph by Ed Sheeran, plays as the crowd releases white balloons into the evening sky. Nyla often ends her speeches the same way: "My daughter's dream was to wear a crown and be seen. Now, through her, we see every woman who couldn't speak, every girl who thought love meant control. Kimberly's light will never fade. It lives in every woman who finds the strength to say no." The story of Kimberly Karen Moda is no longer just a tragedy. It has become a movement, a reminder that beauty is not just in crowns or titles, but in the courage to reclaim one's freedom. According to highway surveillance footage, Rafael's white sedan was spotted heading north from Manaus toward the Venezuelan border, late on May 11th, just hours after Kimberly's murder. In the car, alone, he looked composed, almost eerily calm. Authorities immediately set up checkpoints across Amazonas state. fearing he might try to cross into Venezuela, where extradition could prove difficult. By this point, Kimberly's murder had ignited nationwide outrage. Photos of her radiant smile circulated across every major Brazilian news outlet under headlines like "Miss Manicure murdered by jealous boyfriend." Social media flooded with the hashtag Justiça por Kimberly, Justice for Kimberly, turning her case into a rallying cry against femicide and domestic violence. Meanwhile, investigators began piecing together the final moments of Kimberly's life. Forensic analysis revealed that she had been attacked in the bedroom, likely after a confrontation that escalated when she tried to end the relationship. Defensive wounds were found on her hands and arms, proving she had fought back desperately. Neighbors later testified that around 11:40 p.m., they heard a loud argument, a woman screaming, and then silence. Yet no one called the police, something that would weigh heavily on the conscience of those living in the building for years afterward. On May 14th, just 2 days after Kimberly's body was discovered, police in Boa Vista, near the Venezuelan border, received a tip from a local motel owner. A man matching Rafael's description had checked in under a false name, using a Venezuelan ID. Officers surrounded the area and arrested him without resistance. He was sitting on the bed, scrolling through his phone. When police entered, he raised his hands and said quietly, "It's over." At the station, Rafael initially denied everything, claiming Kimberly had left his apartment alive and that someone else must have entered afterward. But confronted with forensic evidence, his fingerprints on the knife, blood on his clothes, and surveillance footage of him fleeing the city, his lies crumbled. After hours of interrogation, he finally confessed. His voice was cold and detached as he said, "She wanted to leave me. I couldn't accept it. I loved her too much." The confession shocked even seasoned investigators. Rafael described how Kimberly had told him that night she didn't want to continue the relationship, that she needed space and wanted to focus on her studies. Rage consumed him. He grabbed a kitchen knife from the counter and attacked her in a fit of jealousy and despair. When asked why he covered her body and left the air conditioner on, he said chillingly, "I didn't want her to rot, I wanted her to stay beautiful." After the confession, Rafael was charged with femicide, aggravated homicide, and concealment of a corpse. The trial began in 2021 and drew intense public attention. Prosecutors portrayed Rafael as manipulative, obsessive, and dangerously possessive, a man who viewed love as ownership. During the hearings, Kimberly's mother, Nyla Mota, faced him directly for the first time. The courtroom fell silent as she looked him in the eyes and said, "You killed my daughter because you mistook control for love, but love never kills." Her words became the defining moment of the trial. In August 2021, Rafael Fernandez Rodriguez was found guilty and sentenced to 31 years in prison, the maximum penalty under Brazilian law for femicide. The judge's closing statement captured the essence of the tragedy. This was not a crime of passion, but of possession. Kimberly was not killed because she stopped loving. She was killed because she dared to live freely. The verdict brought some closure to Kimberly's family, but her mother's grief transformed into a mission. Understanding his actions in controlling his behavior at the time of the crime. In other words, he was completely sane, and therefore, fully responsible for what he did to Kimberly. The court proceedings in Manaus, which began on October 27, 2021, quickly became one of the most closely followed trials in Brazil that year. The case represented not only the horrifying end of a promising young woman's life, but also the brutal pattern of gender-based violence that had claimed the lives of so many others. During the first days of testimony, Kimberly's uncle Henry recounted the night she went missing and the days of desperate searching that followed. His calm voice cracked when he described finding out she had been in Rafael's apartment all along. "I trusted him," Henry said quietly. "I let him into our home, and he took away the light of our family." Then came the testimony of forensic experts. They described in haunting detail how the scene in Raphael's apartment revealed clear signs of premeditation and control, not a sudden act of madness, but a deliberate, possessive outburst. The air conditioner running at maximum cold, the bed carefully covered, the knife placed neatly on the balcony. All these details pointed to an attempt to delay discovery and manipulate the aftermath. Prosecutors argued that Raphael's actions fit perfectly within the legal definition of femicide murder, committed against a woman for reasons of gender, often rooted in jealousy, control, or the belief that the woman belonged to the perpetrator. When Raphael finally took the stand, he was emotionless. He admitted to stabbing Kimberly, but insisted he lost control after reading her messages. "I loved her too much," he said softly. "When I saw those texts, something inside me broke." The courtroom fell into a heavy silence, but it wasn't sympathy that filled the air. It was anger. The prosecutor responded sharply, "This is not love. This is possession. You killed her because she chose freedom." Kimberly's mother, Nyla Moda, sat through every session, clutching a photo of her daughter in a white dress, smiling. When asked if she wished to speak at the end of the proceedings, she rose and faced Raphael directly. Her words pierced the silence. "You didn't kill her because she betrayed you. You killed her because you couldn't stand to see a woman live without you. But now, she will live forever in every girl who refuses to stay silent." On November 3, 2021, after just 3 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a unanimous verdict: guilty of femicide, qualified homicide, and concealment of a corpse. The judge sentenced Rafael Fernandez Rodriguez to 31 years in prison, the maximum penalty under Brazilian law for femicide. In the ruling, he emphasized, the defendant's motive was base and despicable. He did not act out of madness, but out of control and entitlement. Kimberly's only crime was wanting to live her life freely. After the verdict, crowds gathered outside the courthouse, chanting "Justiça por Kimberly," justice for Kimberly. But the story didn't end there. Kimberly's mother turned her pain into purpose. She founded the Instituto Kimberly Moda, a non-profit dedicated to supporting women facing domestic violence, offering legal aid, psychological counseling, and emergency shelter. Within a year, it had helped dozens of women across Amazonas state. Shaber and his team from the Independence Police Department arriving shortly after the 911 call. What they found inside Louise Dickey's modest home was a scene of unimaginable violence, one that suggested not just murder, but rage, personal familiarity, and perhaps betrayal. Louise's body was found fully clothed in the bathtub, submerged in water now turned red from her wounds. The medical examiner would later confirm she had suffered 98 stab wounds, including multiple deep slashes to her neck and chest. The sheer number of wounds indicated a frenzied and prolonged attack, not a random burglary or quick assault. The killer had spent time there, and whoever it was, likely knew Louise personally. There were also peculiar details that caught investigators' attention. The bathroom appeared almost too clean, as if someone had tried to wash away blood, but failed. Louise's wallet and pain. Medication were missing. Her car, a silver 2007 Chevy Malibu, was gone. There were no signs of forced entry, meaning Louise probably let her killer in willingly. Detective Shaber and his team began by questioning neighbors. Barbara, the woman next door, told police that the night before, March 28, 2016, she had heard banging sounds and a woman shouting, but she couldn't make out words. She assumed Louise might have dropped something, or was having trouble with her cats again. Now, realizing the truth, Barbara broke down in tears. The following day, the investigation began to narrow. Surveillance footage from a local gas station less than a mile away showed Louise's Chevy Malibu being driven at around 2:30 a.m. hours after the suspected time of death. Behind the wheel was a young man, estimated to be in his late teens or early 20s, wearing a black hoodie. Investigators zoomed in on the footage and noticed a distinctive tattoo on his hand, a small cross between his thumb and index finger. A few hours later, Louise's credit card was used at an ATM to withdraw $200. Again, surveillance footage captured the same young man. Within 48 hours, police identified him, Jonathan Porter, a 19-year-old who lived only 3 blocks away. When detectives brought Porter in for questioning, he initially denied everything. He said he had found the car abandoned and didn't know Louise at all. But when confronted with DNA evidence, blood found on his jeans that matched Louise's, his story began to fall apart. Finally, he confessed, according to Porter's statement. He had met Louise months earlier through a local community outreach program that helped young adults find jobs. Louise, always generous, had occasionally given him small amounts of money and even offered him food. But as his drug use worsened, Porter began seeing her as an easy target. On the night of March 28th, desperate for money, he decided to rob her. He claimed he only meant to take her purse, but when Louise caught him rifling through her belongings, she screamed. In panic, he grabbed a kitchen knife, and then, as he put it, just lost it. The brutality of the attack, however, made investigators doubt this version of events. The number of stab wounds, 98, suggested sustained rage, not panic. In the weeks that followed, the community of Independence mourned deeply. Louise wasn't just a victim. She was known as a kind, music-loving woman. Someone who, despite her pain and disability, still danced a little when her favorite Reba McEntire song came on, as her daughter Miranda later said in court in 2018. Jonathan Porter stood trial for first-degree murder, armed criminal action, and vehicle theft. During the proceedings, his defense claimed that his drug addiction impaired his judgment and that he never meant to kill, but the prosecution countered powerfully, emphasizing the sheer violence of the act and Louise's vulnerability. When Miranda took the stand, her voice trembled but was unwavering. "My mother gave him kindness. She gave him food when he was hungry. And that's how he repaid her, with 98 stab wounds." The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Jonathan Porter was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. We're inside. Louise was behind the wheel, and in the passenger seat sat a young man who appeared to be in his late teens or early 20s. The footage clearly showed them parking, chatting briefly, and then heading toward the entrance together. Louise looked calm, unaware of any danger, while the young man, wearing a dark hoodie and jeans, appeared composed, keeping close beside her. Detectives immediately froze the frame to get a clear look at his face. Even though the image quality wasn't perfect, they could make out some defining details: his short hair, the hoodie's logo, and a small tattoo near his wrist. Inside the Walgreens, surveillance cameras captured the two walking down the aisles. Louise picked up a few personal items: paper towels, cleaning supplies, and a small bag of cat food, typical purchases that suggested she was running normal errands. Meanwhile, the man stayed close, occasionally glancing around, not saying much. At the register, Louise handed the cashier her bank card and paid for everything herself. Then, at 5:11 p.m., they exited together, 2 investigators. This short clip was critical. It proved Louise had been alive, and with this unidentified young man less than 24 hours before her body was found, he was now the prime suspect. Detectives quickly contacted Walgreens corporate security to obtain a high-resolution copy of the footage. They also canvassed nearby businesses to see if the same pair had been caught on other cameras, hoping to trace their movements after they left the store. When Miranda was shown the video, she gasped. "I don't recognize him," she said softly. "I've never seen that man before in my life." That only deepened the mystery. If Louise rarely left her home and had a small social circle, how had this stranger entered her life? Investigators began piecing together a timeline. 5:11 p.m. March 28th, Louise and the suspect leave Walgreens. Sometime later that night, neighbors hear loud noises and shouting from Louise's home. The next morning, her car disappears. Her phone goes silent, and by afternoon, her body is discovered. It was becoming clear this wasn't a random home invasion. The killer had likely been inside with her willingly. Perhaps someone she'd recently met or tried to help. By combining footage from Walgreens and the convenience store, detectives now had two clear sightings of the same man within a short time frame, first with Louise, and then alone with her car and bank card. The case was accelerating, and investigators were closing in. Aside so you can see the home behind me, this quiet residence, here on East 27th Street, is now the center of a devastating tragedy. According to investigators, 26-year-old Corey King spent part of Monday evening inside the home of 63-year-old Louise Dickey, a woman described by her friends and neighbors as gentle, generous, and full of life. Police believe that what started as a small disagreement between the two quickly escalated into unimaginable violence. Detectives say Corey, who was reportedly under the influence of drugs at the time, turned on Louise after she refused to let him stay the night. In a brutal and senseless act, he attacked her from behind with a box cutter, slashing her throat before dragging her to the bathroom and continuing the assault with a kitchen knife. He then stole a few of her belongings, including her debit card, phone, prescription medication, and car keys, before leaving her lifeless body in the bathtub. Investigators say Corey used Louise's car to drive around 4 hours, attempting to withdraw money from her bank account, and later, trying his luck at a casino before he was finally caught. Police located him at a motel near the Ameristar Casino, where he was arrested alongside a woman believed to have been driving the getaway car, though she was later released without charge. Corey King now faces charges of first-degree murder and armed criminal action, and prosecutors have requested a $500,000 cash bond. Neighbors and loved ones remain in disbelief. Many describe Louise as a quiet, kind woman who rarely left her home but was always eager to help others. Her daughter Miranda is said to be heartbroken but grateful to the officers who worked tirelessly to bring her mother's killer to justice as police continue to piece together the full timeline of events. This small Independence neighborhood has been left shaken, a tight-knit community now struggling to come to terms with the horrific loss of one of its own, so our viewers can get a better view of the scene. We're standing on East 27th Street, right near Hardy Avenue in Independence, the quiet neighborhood where this horrifying tragedy unfolded. According to police, after stopping at a gas station and a Dollar General together, Corey King murdered Louise Dickey in the bathroom of her own home. Here's a look at King's mugshot. Investigators say King, who has a history of substance abuse, admitted he was under the influence of marijuana and Xanax at the time of the murder. Police also revealed that King's aunt was a close friend of Louise's, the connection that brought him to her house that night. King told police he asked to sleep on Louise's couch, but when she refused, he attacked her, stabbing her multiple times with both a box cutter and a knife. Friends and family say Louise was a kind-hearted, generous woman who would help anyone in need. Her death has left her loved ones in shock and disbelief. She never hurt anybody. She was so open and giving, one friend said through tears. I'm a Christian, but I don't think I could ever forgive him for what he did. Police say King stole Louise's car after the murder and later abandoned it at a nearby gas station, using signals from her cell phone and bank card activity. Investigators were able to track him down and arrest him at a motel in the Kansas City metro area. For Louise's family, the news was devastating. It's just so hard to believe, her daughter Miranda said. My mom mostly kept to herself. She was on disability and lived alone. Nobody deserves to die like that. Her longtime high school friend Sabra Armstrong also spoke out, saying, "I talked to her the day before she died. I'm angry. I hope he gets the death penalty. She didn't deserve this." Louisa's family remembers her as a gentle soul, a woman who loved her cats and would often call herself a cat lady with pride. "If I ever needed anything," she'd just say, "Let's go get it," one family member recalled. In the end, Corey King pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and armed criminal action. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murder of Louise Dickey, plus another life term for armed criminal action, the two sentences to run concurrently. He remains incarcerated at the Potosi Correctional Center in Mineral Point, Missouri. Louise Dickey will be remembered as a warm, compassionate woman who cared deeply for her family and friends, a person who faced life's challenges with grace and gratitude. As the rain falls softly and the night deepens. Thank you for joining me here at Crime Whisper. These true stories remind us not only of life's mysteries, but also of the importance of awareness, compassion, and vigilance, even in the quiet hours. So tonight, as you rest, let the sound of the rain bring you peace. Stay safe, stay curious, and let the night watch over you.